Well, great to have you all here. So we were excited to showcase the site before we did the final backfilling for the season. But what we wanted to show you was this season has been a little bit different than we've done normally. If you all remember from years past, the sites that we've excavated have been more on the more sites where folks are living, where the enslaved community is living. And what we've done this year is excavate the farm complex down below, which is about a 50-acre complex of buildings, not only of where folks who are working in the farm complex were living, but also, of course, where they're doing work. And this year, what we've done is focused on doing a survey of all these sites we've located through metal detector surveys that we're still doing right now to evaluate all these sites and basically do an inventory of what was at the farm complex. What were the range of buildings? What are the range of sites? And what that tells us about is what this farm complex was. What was going on here? Was it just processing of agricultural crops? Did it combine some activities that in the 18th century, like the blacksmithing that you all know about, that was originally at the temple in the time of the American Revolution? All that seems to have moved down into this farm complex. And what we're excited about with this story and the sites we're finding is it tells a much broader story of the enslaved community. It not just talks about their homes, which we've focused on for the past 2 decades, that tells the story of individual lives, of who they were as families. And that's important to bring the humanity of enslaved Americans back into a tangible form here at Montpelier. But these sites of labor are where enslaved Americans were making their contribution, their mark on the plantation. And what it allows us to tell a story is a story that the Montpelier Descendant Committee has really been asked us to do over the past 3 or 4 years since we completed the work on the South Yard, which is to look at, what were the contributions of their enslaved ancestors. That, we've in many ways here at Montpelier, we've addressed the story of their ancestors as people, as members of the community, as mothers, fathers, daughters, brothers. But what we haven't really successfully done is address the intellectual contribution of the enslaved Americans. I mean, enslaved Americans here were much more than just labor. I mean, they were the labor that produced all of the wealth that the Madisons had, everything from the work in the fields to what happened in the house. But in doing that labor for over 100 years, because you're talking about from the 1720s, when the first enslaved Americans arrived here with an overseer in 1723 to clear the land and begin the tobacco cultivation, all the way up until when Dolly Madison sold the enslaved community in 1844, you've got a 122-year record of people creating lives, but then also they're the ones that knew the land. They're the ones that had cleared the land. They're the ones that had plowed the land. They knew where the best soil was. They knew what happened to soil when you had a gully washer and you plowed the soil in a certain way, how that soil is going to erode. They're the ones that knew what variety of tobacco crops worked best in what fields, and then with these tobacco crops, which tobacco was best suited for smoke curing, heat curing versus air curing. And everything from going into the late 18th century with grain cultivation, what sort of grains grew best, what kind of threshing technology allowed these grains to be threshed in a mechanical way versus a manual way. I mean, they held that knowledge base in their collective community mind. And this is information that wasn't just owned by individuals. This was passed on to 2 generations, to the next generation of workers and farm supervisors here who were all enslaved. And what we begin to explore these stories by is where all this happened. And what archaeology allows us to do here is place these actions at a specific site. And what it turns out that Montpelier has that, a lot of you all know about from being on previous tours, is we've got this incredibly well-preserved landscape. When Dolly Madison sold Montpelier in 1844, not only was the enslaved community sold, but the landscape essentially was abandoned in place. And so while the buildings went away, the archaeological sites remain preserved. And all through the 20th century, we really have the DuPont heritage to really thank for this preservation, is all through the 20th century when you have mechanical plowing occurring throughout the U.S., that wasn't happening here. The DuPonts didn't need to make money off of fields, plowing fields, or harvesting trees in the woods. They're the DuPont chemical fame of Delaware. So it's investments that allowed the DuPonts to make the money, but also allowed this landscape to be preserved. And as such, what the landscape serves as a witness for is for the memory of the contributions that the enslaved Americans made. In fact, the Montpelier Descendant Committee is referred to what we do with archaeology is this landscape memory device. It's a device that records the memories that are gone. They aren't recorded in the documentary record because some of these were burned by the Madison family soon after Dolly Madison died. They're not in any of the economic records because enslaved people didn't have a place in those records because they were property themselves. All those records and the proceeds from that belong to the Madison family. So what's in the ground allows us to really understand what happened here, and in that way, it's a memory device that, you think about why the Madison's nieces and nephews ended up making a decision to burn the records that were at Todd's birth that were gathered up by John Payne Todd. This is in 1854 when he had passed away. They say that it was because Mr. Madison was an incredibly private individual. Well, not Mr. Madison, Uncle Jimmy was an incredibly private individual and wouldn't want to have his personal life being gone through by the press. But also, no matter what the intent was, they were destroying the record of the contributions of enslaved at this place. And you have to think, if and this didn't happen just here, it happened at many plantations, if some of these enslavers had understood what an incredible record the archaeological record preserves, you got to wonder what they do at some of these sites, whether it'd be like, oh, we want to clean the landscape up and get rid of all these artifacts that are on the ground, leave no clues. And this is something that, as owners of the land, but also of the labor, this is something that was concerning enslavers, as there was more problematic issues were brought up about slavery. So what we're doing here at Montpelier is we're able to look at the archaeological record, but what's spectacular about the archaeological record here isn't just how well preserved it is, but also where it is. So let's go out to where you parked your cars and then look at where all this record is. I mean, it's right there. Where you park your car today, you're closer to the farm complex than you are to the main house. And so what we've done over the past 20 years is really focus on getting the main house restored, as all of y'all have seen, reconstruct the buildings in the south yard, and then to begin to develop an understanding through the archaeology of the architecture, but also of the material world of what slaves' domestic lives are like. But when you're parked here in the parking lot, what you look down on is what we're beginning to transform from this bucolic field landscape of rolling grass fields into what was a farm complex. And on the map right here, what you can see, this is a 3D rendering of what this space would look like from this vantage point. And this is based on our initial surveys that we did through metal detector surveys about 5 years ago. Nails are what metal detectorists call Montpelier gold, because it's a gold mine of information for all of locating the buildings, but also for dating the buildings, because as we'll talk about, Mary will be talking about this, is the nail manufacture between the American Revolution up until the 1840s changes 4 times. And so when you locate these concentrations of nails, not only do you know that you've got a building there, but then also you can, by the date of the manufacture of the nails, you can date when that building was built. And as it turns out, these changes in manufacturing technology mirror almost to a T the different changes in agricultural production that were changed by different generations of Madisons. From James Madison's parents taking over the plantation from the grandmother, where it goes from basically all tobacco cultivation to mixed cultivation. And then when James Madison Jr. begins changing the operations of the plantation in the 1790s, you get another change in nail manufacture that documents more scientific farming of the time period. So with all this, what we've done is with the metal detector surveys, and you can see this in the map I gave you all, is what we've done is we've got, we're up here at the visitor center. So if you look where we're at right here at the middle of the parking lot here, and look down in this direction, you can begin to see some of the flags down there. There's also, you see there's a whole passel of flags over there. That area over there is our most recent discovery, is this area right here, which is labeled as a barn with a question mark. What we've done, and that's what, kind of the placeholder for that, is with a metal detector survey, we use these 10-foot grids. The metal detector is sweep each one of these grids. Oh, Tom, here you go, have a map.
Yeah, I got it.
Oh, you got one, okay. Oh, here you go.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go. With what we do is regrid the whole landscape on a 10-foot grid, and then within each of these 10-foot grids do a count of how many historic artifacts, mainly nails, are located. And then you get this heat map where you have the red concentrations, it's a higher concentration, over 50 artifacts, down to green, which is down to 0. And where you have these peaks, that's showing where we've actually got buildings. And once we locate these hot spots on the map, what we do is go in and do our archaeology, which is, shovel test pits, which are little round holes in the ground. We dig down to subsoil, screen the soil, and look for any other artifacts, and also soil discolorations, which would be features, trash pits, post holes, and the like. And then use that collective information to open up 5x5 excavation units that allow us to uncover architectural features such as post holes or piers, and then also the kind of deposits that are at these sites. And what we found from the combination of metal detector survey and these unit excavations is this is basically it's a quasi-industrial area. There are some very specialized activities. So for years we've talked about the buildings down there we call, the homes for field slaves. Well, now that we understand this farm complex, what it's evident is those are probably the homes of the artisans or specialists that are working here in the farm complex. So we've got, as an example of what kind of activities are happening here, we have two separate and discrete, they're operating at the same time, two blacksmith shops. We've got a threshing barn complex. We've got a stable that would have been more, not just for agricultural activities, but also for, the carriage horses that would have been arriving here with the guests, and also the Madison's carriage and riding horses. We've also got in this area tobacco barns for curing the tobacco, a whole range of activities. And we still have not done excavations on half of the sites we've found thus far. So we still have a lot to do to uncover, what's in this area. But in the end, what we want to do is to begin to reconstruct these buildings through our log cabin programs, where we actually ghost them and mark the landscape with these buildings. So like the buildings down there, we've actually reconstructed during these 1-week log cabin programs. And this is all this Learn logo, where locate is the metal detector surveys, excavate is the 5x5 units, A is for analysis, the lab analysis that Mary will talk about when we get down to the site, and then R is for reconstruct, the reconstruction programs with log cabin programs, and then N is networking, which we're all doing right now. So that's Learn. And what the goal is to be able to put this landscape back into the mind's eye of a visitor. And then in the end, what hopefully we can do is create plans for how to reconstruct this space. Do we reconstruct it completely like we've done at the South Yard? Do we do it through other alternative means like augmented reality? Do we choose particular sites that are important, in discussions with folks like the Montpelier Descendant Committee to figure out what parts of the farm landscape really represent the contributions of African Americans here? Because like at the main house, our emphasis there is Mr. Madison and his work as a political scholar and as a political philosopher, if you will. With the enslaved community, we're working with the descendant community and committee to see what really the most important contributions of the ancestors are here, the enslaved Americans that worked here, and then the best way to present that to the public visitors through what we're reconstructing. So basically what we're doing this season and next season as well as an inventory of all this landscape, not just to figure out what this place looked like, but to give us, Montpelier, our future direction in interpreting this space and telling, you know, a much more complete story of what was here. So let's go ahead and head down to the site.
So what I have brought here are 3 trays, one from each of the sites, so you could really see what the difference looks like artifact-wise coming out of the different sites. So this first tray is from what we were calling the Blacksmith Shop. So the site on the top of the hill down there. And just from one unit, this entire tray full of slag plus this entire bag that we haven't filled in the tray came out of that unit. So massive amounts of slag, which is really showing us that this is a site of production. So slag is the waste from the blacksmithing process. But it's some of these iron artifacts are telling us some really cool things too. So we get an idea of what is being made and the kind of work that's being done. So you have things like this, which are a hand wrought chain link, something like this, which looks really similar to the chain link, but I think is actually more like a handle for like a scissor or a tong, because the way it comes off here and sort of the round shape of it, and all sorts of bibs and babs of things that we have no idea what they are, because they're the little parts that have been cut off or broken off when somebody's doing repair work or making something. But one of the other things that we have lots and lots of coming out of here are these guys, which are horseshoe nails. So horseshoe nails are identifiable by these big fat heads, and then they have these sort of flat, long bodies. And when they're brand new, they come to a really pointy point. And when a horseshoe nail is driven into the horse's foot to apply the horseshoe, the nail itself is actually beveled to make the nails bend out away from the tender part of the foot. So when we find these used horseshoe nails, they almost always have that bend to them, and then the tips of them are clipped off when you apply and remove the horseshoes. So if you have all the way to the full tip, you know that horseshoe nail has never been used, but if you have just the head and the shank with that sort of telltale bend, it lets us know that that's a horseshoe nail that's been used, so that removal process has been done by a farrier or a blacksmith. So we moved to the site that we were calling the farrier site. And what you can see initially is there's less stuff coming out of here, but still a whole lot of slag. So instead of 2 trays worth of slag, just 1 tray worth of slag. Lots of iron stuff. Again, lots and lots of these little horseshoe nails. And so initially we were calling this a farrier site because we had noticed so many of these horseshoe nails. And I think what had happened was we had missed how many of these actually were in the blacksmithing site, because there was so much stuff that we were missing how many of them came out. But we're also finding, still at this site, a lot of these little weird things, clipped off little bits. I don't know what this is, but it's a thing. All of these kind of little bits of stuff, and then this is a hand wrought nail, so like a building nail rather than a horseshoe nail. So all of these things coming out. So it has us sort of like ask the question, is this a different blacksmith shop? Is this primarily a farrier shop, but they're doing some other bits here? We've also found some pewter come out of here and a little bit of brass, and we didn't find any other non-ferrous or non-iron metals coming out of the main blacksmithing shop. So are they contemporaneous, or are they at different times? So there's still a lot of questions we still have to figure out. So we've just started cataloging all of this, and that's when we'll actually have the real counts and numbers for, are there more horseshoe nails at the farrier shop or at the blacksmith shop? What does the percentage look like? Of the other kinds of nails, what do they date to? So that will help us sort some things out. Then we have the burn site. So these are artifacts from 2 different units, and already the artifacts are looking really, really different. First of all, there's a whole lot less, right? One of the things that I thought was really neat is we start to see a little bit of domestic stuff come up, and we found, I think, 2 pieces of ceramic at the entire blacksmith shop. One actually piece of bamboo and peony, and a couple of pieces of green shell edge that looked like they were from the same vessel. So like somebody dropped their green shell edge plate. But the big difference is the nails themselves. So instead of seeing all those little bent, big-headed horseshoe nails that have been clipped off, what we're seeing are tons and tons of machine cut nails. So building nails, but that date. Here's a really lovely example of one. You can see the blunted foot, the sort of rectangular shape. All of this means nothing to most of you except for Matt and I, but this is a really good indicator of dating, placing this well into the 19th century rather than the earlier nails of the 18th century. But look, horseshoe. And maybe a yoke piece or some other kind of cool thing. So other things are coming up, but what's really neat of where that horseshoe and these other pieces are coming out is we do have a little bit of ceramic. We finally have some animal bones, so some cow teeth coming out, which is really fun. And a tiny little broken bone button. Yeah, so real sweet, a little 4-holer bone button and a tiny little shard of glass. There was also a bunch of weird things that came out of a different unit from the burn site, the slate stuff, and again, these nails, a little hand-painted porcelain. So we're getting a little bit more of a smattering of domestic artifacts, but more variety, and certainly the iron is shifting primarily away from shoeing and unshoeing horses and working and creating iron into whole things that you're actually working with or using and building related stuff. So definitely has a different artifact signature than these two sites. The similarities and the differences between these two sites are giving me a lot of questions and getting really excited to see what it looks like when we then can map out where all the horseshoe nails are. We can really date all of the machine cut versus the hand wrought nails and really see what we have going on here. So I invite you, if you guys have any questions, but I'll also invite you to come up. And the joy of archaeology is you can touch everything. So get your hands a little rusty and dirty, touch some of this stuff, look at it, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Just don't move things between trays. So the machine cut nails start in the 19th century. Depending on whether they have a hand wrought head or a machine cut head, there is some variation, and because I haven't cataloged them all yet, I haven't identified them all yet. But let's see if I can do a quick ID. That looks like a side pinched versus some face pinch. So we're looking at 1820s, 1840s, kind of that time period.
All right, so this is the current excavation site, although we are actually today wrapping things up. But what we think we found here is a fire curing or smoke curing tobacco barn from the early mid-19th century. And for those of you who have been here for a while may know that we've previously found a fire curing tobacco barn just basically on the other side of that fence in 2012. And the reason we were able to identify that in the previous barn is that there were these linear trenches that had burn materials in them, indicating that there would be coals or firewood or whatever was being used to actually create the smoke. But this site was a bit of a mystery at the start because it's actually one of the first I kind of identified sites at Montpelier in a way. The first unit ever dug at Montpelier was dug at this site back in 1987, and I'll show that to you all. But what clued the archaeologists at that time into what this was is this sort of ovular berm, or by that I mean like a low mound that's surrounding the site. And then within it there's these circular depressions. So you might notice how it kind of dips down and it's this little saucer. There's another one in the middle of the site and then another one over there. Which actually kind of matches up with the previous tobacco barn we found. There were 3 sections of rectilinear burn trenches. But these appeared at first to at least be pits, so maybe a little bit different. So let's head on in a little closer to the features we found and how we were able to use those to figure out that it was indeed a tobacco barn. Y'all can squeeze in a little closer so you can get a good view of the stratigraphy. It's awesome. A lot of very small strata, stuff that really gets us excited in the dirt. So
I've seen it recently.
Oh, you can see it again. So anyways, what you're actually seeing here, I'll get in, where's my trowel? There's this sort of, it looks like a square hole that we dug inside of a square hole, but this here is actually, we unbackfilled a unit from 1987. The soil in there was very distinct, and you can actually see 1987 string. So we have unit string. They just threw the string at the bottom, still intact, pretty cool. But they dug it right in the middle of one of these circular depressions. And when we've realized that it was in the middle of a large pit feature. And this is the edge of that pit feature. We've actually recently realized it might be bigger, but that's beside the point. And if you all kind of look over here, you can just see all of this burned soil. So these dark soils with charred wood in it, this fire-hardened clay here. It almost sounds like brick, and then layers of ash. So there's multiple episodes of fires in here. So lighting fires, and it's actually turning our subsoil. See this red clay that's at the bottom of the pit? If you all want to come up and get a closer look, you're welcome to. Our subsoil is naturally red, but this is even more red and harder. So the fires here were going so frequently that it was chemically altering the soil and changing its color and its hardness. And there are multiple episodes of doing that, using soil to fill it in, maybe to put the fires out. But what's really, really cool is as we got farther down in the excavations, because we were assuming these may be like burned pits as opposed to burned trenches, so a different style of tobacco barn, which means they're probably not happening at the same time, because we know that one got turned into a threshing barn after it was a tobacco barn, because there was all these threshing machine teeth. But in any case, sorry if I'm kind of going all over the place. We've realized at the bottom, if you all are super keen of eye, you might notice there's we have a different soil here and also over here. If you want to see, within this pit, we have a trench, and it's lightly scored here, and it's defined by this red soil. So we found an edge of red soil that comes here, and then it turns that way and lines up with the trench that we found in that unit. So within these big circular pits, there's a square-shaped rectilinear trench, just like at the tobacco barn that we found there. And there's...
That's awesome. I just thought I missed that, but that turns like that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and then we think it turns right here too, right here. So it's very interesting, but very exciting for us, because we can start to build patterns and comparisons from different time periods within sites that are very close to one another. And it just gives us more data to compare how, like going back to what Matt used to start out, the sort of skills through generations of doing all this labor and learning what methods work the best here at Montpelier, because fire curing and smoke curing tobacco barns are different in multitude of plantations throughout time, and these enslaved laborers are experimenting and finding what works best. And that's a highly skilled, knowledgeable labor that we are uncovering. Yeah, we're not finding super exciting ceramics and transferwares and things like that, but this burned soil is just as, if not more exciting to us, because it really reflects like what is happening here, like how the site formed through what activities in the past.
There's a water tower up in the woods behind the pony barn. The well for that used to be down here where those black posts are, and that's on the 1908 map. There's something called the ram pump, and it's down at the bottom of the hill here. We located that earlier this season. But there's a pipe that runs from the ram pump up the hill here and then over to where the visitor center is today, and then it leads over to the water tower up in the woods. But this is the area where when Dennis was doing the metal detector survey last spring, he and Tony found a lead pipe down in this area that indicated that the ram pump that's shown in the 1908 map actually dates earlier, because the DuPonts don't use any lead pipe. The 1908 map from the main house shows where all the pipes are, and during the main house restoration, we did about 3 years of utility excavations so we could use the old utility trenches to put in new utilities so we wouldn't disturb anything at the main house. And we became experts on DuPont pipe. All the DuPont pipe is iron pipe, like you're about to see at the bottom of the hill here. And then the only place where we found a lead pipe was a pipe that went from the well house, the well house that's over by the south yard, into the south wing, what we used to call Nellie's kitchen, the south wing of the main house where the cellar kitchen is. There's a lead pipe that ran into there, and based on the archaeology that we did, it dates to the mid-19th century. So this, from doing excavations in 2004, we found this exact same sort of pipe, and we have the 1908 map doesn't show the pipe because it's only the detail like that for the main house, but this is this 1908 pipe, and it's cutting through all this slag layer in here and all these large stones that you don't find naturally in brick. And then here's this beautiful, what appears to be a potentially intact foundation, and between here is this massive feature that could be, you know, the forge, and if it is, why it's so deep. We're just beginning to understand this site. There's thousands of more questions and answers, but like what Mary was showing you, all the artifacts that are blacksmithing from the farrier are from here. And it'll be interesting this winter for the analysis to see how they're different from what is up at the blacksmith shop, like Mary was saying.
The top of these units had nails, where we stopped was like the same layer as that we were seeing there with all the slag, and there was nail stock and
oh my God,
all kinds of crazy stuff just sitting right there, but we didn't dig it, saving it for the future.
Yeah. So,
Do you have the button?
I do have the button.
Ah, yes.
So Chris will show you the button, but all of what we're doing right here is what's called phase 2 archaeology.
So in archaeology, the 3 phases. Phase 1 is survey. That's finding the things. So that's the metal detecting, or when we do shovel test pits, just let's find stuff. That also involves historical research, looking at maps or doing things like LiDAR. So that's all phase 1. Phase 2 is figuring out what the things you found are. So for example, the burn site, we're like, there's a site there. We don't know what it is. We call it the burn site. Phase 2, we figure out, oh, it's a tobacco barn. Phase 3 is finding out all the information of the site, figuring out its boundaries, being able to interpret it, like what we've done in the South Yard. So doing that really full excavation to the point where you could do reconstruction, you can do furnishing, you can tell a complete story of the site. So those are the 3 phases in archaeology.
What Dennis is doing with the map that's right here, that, like Mary is saying, that's part of phase 2, where 5 years ago he found the sites with a 20-meter grid survey. Right now Dennis is doing the 10-foot survey to actually locate the buildings. And then this phase 2 allows us to define where the edge is, if there's intact stratigraphy like this one is. And Chris is bringing around a button. What's the button you get?
It's a Confederate infantry button that's fully intact, hollow, brass. Dennis helped identify it. It's got a Y mark on the back, but it was found in that 1902 iron pipeline, which is very interesting, which means it was probably on the landscape when the DuPont workers were working here. We don't know which layer it would have been from before that pipe trench went in, but it very well indicates that this structure may have actually, and this forge may have been operating when the Confederate Army was camped at Montpelier in 1863 into 1864, which that's a whole nother set of questions about what the sort of post-Madison era and the enslaved landscape and the labor landscape and what that looks like during the war. And this is just, this connects this Madison era site to, you know, the history and the constitutional crisis of the Civil War too. That's very powerful. It's also just a cool artifact, but there's a lot of story behind it. So.
Every single building we've located that goes into the Civil War, we found Confederate artifacts at, because when the troops occupied the property, the Confederate troops, they used every single building except for the main house. And where, like in the South Yard, I don't think we even found one Civil War artifact, because all those buildings are taken down in the 1840s. The field quarter, the same thing. But over at the overseer's house, there were a couple of Confederate items found there, or Civil War artifacts found there. So that indicates that overseer's house might have been standing into the Civil War era. So it's hard to say, because in the 1848, there's an 1848 plat that shows the overseer's house there, and it's kind of, I feel like with that plat, it's kind of like an advertisement, like, here's a plantation, it has an overseer's house and a mill. So it's really neat that this one's here. The road that Dennis found coming through this area came right by this site, and then we'll follow it up past the field slave quarter and over to the blacksmith shop. So y'all got your steps in today, which is great. So if y'all can come over here and see this, this is really, really cool. The only place where we found bricks that are in a line is in the South Yard. And when we were looking at the blacksmith shop here, we were finding with Dennis with the metal detector survey, and this is borne out with the units as well, we were finding clipped iron all across this area, some slag along the edges. But then when we got into this unit right here, inside this area there wasn't a lot of clipped iron, but there was a lot of slag. And then we came across these bricks, And we had found bricks at this site, and we were thinking that the forge, the easiest way to build a forge is out of brick. Like if you go to Monticello, the forge and the nailery is made up of brick. It's just the easiest way to make a structure for blacksmithing. And so finding these three bricks right here, it's very similar to what we found as a pier in the south yard for the one duplex. The other duplex is completely made of stone, at least the foundation is, but the other one is the one with the brick chimney base, also had brick piers that looked exactly like this. The question is, that's kind of scary, is at least archaeologically scary, is whether or not the forge itself is somewhere in this area, like the actual brick structure of the forge where the blacksmiths, the enslaved blacksmiths are doing the labor, or is it out here where the DuPont laborers cut this road through? Because when Dennis did the metal detector survey and we had a program that the season after, we found a concentration of metal detector debris here, and then there's just a little blip of it over where the stair comes in right there. So this road cuts through that, and so whether that is cut through the main part of the forge, we can only hope that it didn't. But nevertheless, we found this, and this is, you know, for the amount of damage that's happened at this site, to just have this road be the only disturbance for this entire complex, it's pretty remarkable. So this is, you know, originally we thought this was the blacksmith shop, but then it is, but then we got the other one that we were just at. But what's interesting about this one, like Chris was saying, is it's right next to the overseer's house, right at the top of the ridge right there. And so all this, you know, it's the overseer's house here is really the equivalent of the main house at the south yard. There'd be no way to understand the relationship of power when you're looking at the south yard unless you knew where the main house was. And the same thing here, the supervisory role of the overseer here, when you look at where the overseer's house is in relationship to all this, basically every single site except for the farrier's site can be seen from the overseer's house. And so what that means about the farrier's site in terms of control and, you know, where if you were an enslaved blacksmith, where you'd be preferring to work and where work would tend to take place. You know, it's something, all questions we want to ask and be answered. One thing that we found is over at these buildings over here, the homes, we found back in 2012, we found a chisel that was made out of a horseshoe. So it was a horseshoe that had been refashioned into a woodworking chisel. And so, you know, items that are being made here, you know, items that are in the quarters would have been made at the blacksmith shop. And then what sort of trade blacksmiths would be engaged in with the rest of the community, with the rest of the, you know, the local farmers, that sort of thing. It's all something that we need to explore, which is cool. So anything else to add?
I mean, there were some, I don't know, Mary didn't have some of the artifacts. Well, you had some blacksmith artifacts.
Yeah.
But we found like 2 different types of tong ends, right?
Yeah, they're in the lab right now getting cataloged. But we found tong ends, we found lots of clipped iron, that all those big bags of slag that I brought are from this unit. And then if you went into this unit, there wasn't as much slag and it was tons of iron bits. So it was really cool to see just these 2 units right next to each other. This one had, you know, 2 huge bags of slag come out and kind of a reasonable amount of iron. And this one had like a huge bag of iron come out of it and sort of a little reasonable amount of slag. So thinking about where work is happening, or maybe a trash pile, if you will, of little bits getting clipped off. We found little waste pieces. That was one of the things we just identified, where like a punch had been used and you have these perfect little circles coming out. But all these really...
found a punch too, maybe.
Yeah, maybe a punch. We found hinges, we found broken keys, we found broken parts of tools, other architectural pieces, horse-related pieces. So just a really nice array of things and a whole bunch of stuff that we don't know what it is yet. What's exciting about doing these kinds of phase 2s is this is the question generator. So doing phase 1 and starting phase 2, those are pretty simple questions. Are there things here? What things are here? And now this is sort of the fun part. Now this is the part where we can ask all of those really big interpretive questions of how we can tell whole truth history, multiple interpretations of the past, what did the landscape look like? And what I think is really essential for us is I have a bunch of questions, Chris does, Matt does, but we're all coming at these from the perspective of archaeologists. And what's really important is to not only reach out to you all as our colleagues, because as interpreters and as historians and all of your other perspectives that you're bringing to the site, you're going to have different questions. But the other group that's going to have a lot of questions is the MDC, is the Descendants Committee, and really finding out what do they want to know about these sites. You know, are they interested in them in the same way they are? Are they reading the artifacts in the same way we are? What kind of stories do they have? What questions do they want to know? What site is the most interesting and most important to them? Because what might be interesting to me and what I might want to talk about isn't necessarily the story they want us to focus on. And I think that's what's so exciting about this part is we can now go to them and say, hey, we found all these things. What do you want to know? What do you want to learn about? What's going to help us tell the stories of your family and your ancestors better, and therefore tell the story of this place better? So when all of these people come from across the country and around the world to come to this place and learn, we have those stories to tell them to really get at that, you know, that whole truth history that we talk about that we're trying to do. So being sure that we're not the only people deciding what sites we dig, and that we're not the only people deciding what questions we ask and what the answers are, I think is really an important component of this process.